Okay, I wanted to quickly review this question that you did at the end of last week. This should be pretty easy to interpret your own score on AP Classroom because the rubric is broken down point by point. So when you're looking at your own response and your own score, hopefully it should make sense and it should be pretty straightforward to revise from here. Okay, so this is the same question as the end of last week. We have a large bowl group, a small bowl group, and the purpose of the experiment is to see if eating food with like a large bowl versus eating food with a small bowl influences the amount of food that you end up eating. So they divided participants into group. They recorded some data about how, like, the weight of pasta that people in the large bowl group ate versus people in the small bowl group ate. And then you're given the mean, and then you're given the standard deviation. Okay, so the first thing you're asked to do is to determine the median of the large bowl group. So went over this in the video at the end of last week, but basically you would list the data from the smallest number to the greatest number, and then you would find the middle number. I think almost everyone got this point by identifying the median as 387. The one common mistake I saw was a few people calculated the mean or the average instead of the median. So I'm going to walk you through this student response. Okay, so this student said the median for the large bowl group is 387 grams of pasta. So that's the first point, is correctly calculating the median. The next part of the question asks, describe the research technique used to determine the groups. This was probably the most common mistake. So the research technique used to determine the groups, you can see in the question, is the researcher assigned students to one of the two groups by flipping a coin. This assignment of participants to groups is called random assignment. So here he says the research technique is random assignment. The participants were assigned to groups randomly. So the point again here comes from using the word, from describing the process as random assignment. Probably the most common mistake I saw here was in the student response. They said random sampling. So some of you said like random sampling or random selection. That's a little bit different. Random selection is like if I want to study this experiment, how people eat. Random selection would be like going into the population, so going into a larger city or larger university, and I would be randomly selecting participants to participate in the study. So I'd be like handing out flyers, or I'd be sending people emails, trying to recruit people to come participate in my study. That would be random selection. So it's like you're selecting from the larger population your sample, your random sample that you're going to experiment on. And then random assignment is actually that process of assigning your research participants to groups. So being like, you're going to be a prisoner and you're going to be a guard, or you're going to be in the large bowl group, you're going to be in the small bowl group. So I know this sounds very similar, but it's actually referring to a different process. That process that you want to use in your answer is random assignment. That, again, just imagining flipping a coin to assign your participants to be members of different groups in your experiment. Okay, next question is variability. So in the question, it asked you to explain how the data illustrates differences in variability between the groups. Okay, so let's go back to the student response. He said, The small bowl group has a lower variability and a lower range because all the scores are very close together. The large bowl group has a higher variability and range because the scores are spread out, which causes the mean score to be skewed negatively by the extreme low score. Okay, this looks good. Let's see in the rubric, the point says, the response identified the variance as larger in the large bowl group because, and then any of these three things would have been, would have scored. So you could have said the large bowl group has a larger standard deviation. You could have said the range is larger in the large bowl group, which is mentioned as well, so I'll check that as well. And you could also just say the numbers are more spread out in the large bowl group. So I'd say most people either mentioned the range or mentioned just that the numbers were more spread out in the large bowl group. Looking at the data, there's a larger variation. So the numbers are more spread out from the lowest to the highest. Versus in the small bowl group, the numbers are less spread out. There's less variance between the lowest and the highest number. And then in the student's response, he mentioned both of those things. So he would get the point. Yeah, so any of these three things would have been good here. And then the last question asks you to identify a design flaw in the experiment. So a lot of you mentioned the same one as the student, which is why I chose his response. So you said the study was done at dinner time, and this could be a confounding variable because the hunger of each individual person could be different due to metabolism, a large breakfast or lunch, or eating habits. To correct this, each participant should be asked to eat the same meals and have the same eating habits and scheduled before participating in the study. So I think this is a really great answer. Many of you mentioned this, just the idea that if you're just bringing people in at night for the study at dinner time, it's not really a very controlled study because you have all these confounding variables that you can't control, like how people are eating in the whole day leading up to before they participate in the study. So I gave him the point here. The other two things that could have scored were, and there's a few other ones as well, but two things that the rubric mentions is too few participants. So typically you want a minimum of at least 30 people in a study to make it more legitimate, more scientific. So I think there were only 10 people in this study, 10 participants. So you could have said there are too few participants. You also could have said there are an uneven number of men and women in each group. And many of you mentioned this as well, that the gender distribution between the two groups was not equal, which could have also been a confounding variable or a design flaw in the experiment. Okay, so in this part of the lesson, if you did not get a perfect score on this question, you should be able to go look at your score in AP Classroom, look through the same rubric that I just showed you, see where you lost points, and then revise your response to make it perfect. Good luck.